Second threat is this is a two-sided, two sides to this particular threat. One is the possibility of a credit crunch. The last recession back in 89, 90, through to 92 was in fact created by the local banks. They cut the amount of credit that was being provided because of the geopolitical tensions that existed at the time associated with the Gulf War, and the local economy went into a recession. Well, that is a threat. Fortunately, I suppose I'm happy to tell you that the credit crunch hasn't come this time around. Whilst there has been a decrease generally in the amount of lending, there's been a bigger decrease in the demand deposits. Having said that, the other side of that is the composition of debt in this country. And I'm not talking about public debt, I'm talking about private debt. Private debt is about 5 times bigger than the public debt. We're very fond of blaming our government for that $1 billion legacy they've left us, but there's over a $5 billion mountain of private debt. And what really concerns me is that over $1 billion of that $5 billion is made up of foreign currency. And of course that exposes us to two things: an exchange rate risk and an interest rate risk. Unfortunately, it's going to be difficult for banks to get out of that particular position, that commitment to borrowing in US dollars, and so it is likely that the trend will continue. The threat is, or the risk is, that the amount of foreign currency borrowing could get very close to about $2 billion. The third threat would be wage and price inflexibility. But I'm happy to say that at least in 2009, there was considerable wage and price flexibility, especially in the financial services sector, in the construction sector. That sort of downward movement in wages abated somewhat in 2010, but I think if we're to get out of this recession anytime soon, wage and price flexibility will have to kick in. Unions, of course, stand in the way, but I think we have a small enough community that we can work things out, shorter work weeks, at least in the public sector. There's no doubt that jobs will be lost in the public sector just as they're being lost in the private sector. But for me, those are the three major threats: the obsession with growth, credit crunch, or what is the same thing, overexposure to foreign currency debt, and the third, wage and price inflexibility.
Thank you. Sir John?
Well, we've heard the sort of empirical economic figures, and the question was, what is the threat? And I'd like to take just a slightly different angle, but come back to the threat condition. The biggest threat I see is the lack of information, communication, and assessment in a non-partisan way of who Bermuda is. We don't have a partnership, and you can't run a business, you can't run a household, or have a relationship without a partnership. And government needs to have a true partnership with the business community and with the stakeholders of Bermuda, which is every citizen. And that process is not taking place. So I see that as a big threat, because how can we solve problems unless we discuss them and decide what is it we're going to use to solve those problems, which we will get to at the next meeting. I see an entrenchment of entitlement in Bermuda, where everyone feels as though they're entitled to something because they're Bermudian, when everybody that's non-Bermudian is slowly pulling the plug out of the boat and letting the boat sink. So we have been distracted by our desire to convince people that we are entitled to whatever Bermuda has available, whether you're qualified or not qualified, and you've raised the noise level enough that the international business has decided, we're not going to argue with you anymore, we're simply going to pack up, or pack portions of our business up and leave Bermuda. And there is this constant demise of our main pillar. We say that tourism represents 5% of our GDP, and international business or financial service represents 95 or 90% of our GDP. And that area, tourism hasn't changed very much in terms of real income. In fact, it's been going down. And now we see international business shrink. So our threat is the business that has sustained us for the last 15, 20 years. How do we get that business back? Or how do we get similar types of business back? If not, our whole standard of living is going to fall off very fast. And no one talks about us being in the same boat as Barbados, being a double B, because no one wants to hear it. We don't want to hear bad news. And we're going to get used to hearing bad news. The government has to get used to it. The private sector has to get used to it. So we need to have what I call the big conversation. And 3 years ago, we had the big conversation about race in Bermuda. I'm not sure where that took us. But all I know is while we're having that conversation, we're convincing a lot of people to pack up and leave Bermuda in the process. If we have a conversation about our economic affairs, and you can say that, well, whether it's GDP or whether it's down or payment, at the end of the day, we have to earn foreign currency in order for this country to survive. We have no natural resources, we can't export anything. So it's a question of, when we have our conversation, can we address the things that are relevant to Bermuda, and that we have this conversation not only with adults but with our children? Because if not, we're going to wake up one day and say to them, I'm sorry, I have to pull you out of school. I'm sorry, I can't afford to take you on vacation. And that's the point that Craig was making when he said, our balance of payment, and Red Cobb can tell you the fact that if his bank is using US dollars, at some stage the other, he has to say to us, I'm sorry, there aren't any more, because you don't have the ability to service that debt. And to suggest that the Bermuda debt is 5 million or 6 billion in the private sector and 1 billion in the public sector is a lie. It's the biggest lie that's being perpetuated in Bermuda. The real debt is our pensions are underfunded, our sinking fund hasn't been kept up, and it's enough that it's approximately about 4 to 5. When you add government, I know the Quangos, you see the housing going on South Shore, you see the housing going that's not being occupied, interest is being paid on that. Every Quango owes money. When I was premier, we had that as a liability. 200 million to Bank of Butterfield was a liability, because until the bank pays it off, it's a liability to the government. You have all these Quangos, the hospital commitment that the government has, which they'll have to come up in 2 years' time, and if it's right that the economy is not going to improve, the United States economy really is going to have back traction over the next couple of years. When that money comes due to pay the hospital, where is it going to come from? For that portion of the hospital. So we are in a crisis, and that to me is the threat of the crisis, and we need to have a conversation about that. That, as I see, is the greatest threat to our economy.
Thank you. We're going to get a bit local now, with the first question going to be directed to Mr. Simmons, who he suggests might be given by one of his students.
Oh, no.
The Department of Statistics reports in the CPI releases that rents in the private sector have been in decline for the last 3 years. But those properties subject to rent control have been increasing through this period. Why is this? Why, and second part of the question, why should properties subject to rent control not have rents reduced during a downturn if they've been increased during periods of growth? And what should be done about this?
Okay. Well, this is a methodological problem. And as I like to tell my students, if you're consistently making a mistake, that's okay. If there are errors in the calculation of the CPI, and those errors are being made consistently, what we do when we analyze the CPI is look at the changes. So if every single month the same mistake is being made, that should wash out. And so it's not as bad a problem. I mean, I still have a lot of faith in the CPI figures. It's just that it's perhaps a methodological flaw, but I don't see it as being anything to get that upset about. There is another indicator for inflation, and that's what we call the implicit price index. Unfortunately, that particular indicator is dated because GDP numbers are a year and a half to 2 years behind. But yeah, that's the best way for me to answer that question.
I would answer more from the point of view of the sociological aspects of Bermuda. You have a lot of landlords out there that don't want to rent to Bermudians, because once they get them in, they can't get them out. And Bermudians are prepared to pay an extra bit of money. And when we had a big foreign population, they were happy to rent to those people. And so they pushed the rents up, hoping that the foreigners will come back and rent the place again. So we have particularly at that lower end where the rents are locked in by the index, by the rent commission. So there is a sociological problem that has not yet been sorted out. But as the supply increases and the demand decreases, sooner or later, because these people owe money, they'll have to rent their place whenever comes along, and that's when you'll see the rent sort of at that level sort of flattening out. It's been caught in a sort of a no man's land at the present time.
Well, staying with the subject that is dear to our hearts, so John, I have a question for you. Bermudians with non-Bermudian spouses and PRCs are potential sources of foreign capital, if you fit that into your model. Do the ownership restrictions on real estate and license fees they currently face meet the needs of today's economy? If not, what recommended changes would you suggest?
Well, first of all, we should recognize that we're all human beings. And if a Bermudian is married to a foreigner, they should not be discriminated as a result of that marriage. Rather, that, if our law allows them to get married, allows them to stay in Bermuda, we should not be saying to them, well, you're Bermudian, but you're no longer a Bermudian that has the rights of and what's worse is that even if the person wants to put the property in their own name, they say, no, you can't do that unless you get permission to own a property. The government has to give you permission. So that is against the Human Rights Act if you want to look at it from the point of view the Human Rights Act says that you should not discriminate as a result of origins, color, creed, and aspects. So it's contradictory. And I suspect if anybody took it to court and we got as far as the British court, they would laugh at it. We've got a policy in place that makes no sense. So we should, and that's part of our problem. The policies that don't work, that make an ass of Bermuda, should be eliminated quickly, as we quickly eliminated the pot washing issue. We should just get rid of some of these things.